and good evening and welcome everybody to the British Library, everybody here and also everyone joining us online tonight. I'm Polly Russell and I'm the head of the Eccles Institute for the Americas, and it's a huge pleasure for me to open tonight's event. The Eccles Institute was established to build and preserve the library's Americas collections, to further understanding about the Americas and to support researchers of all kinds who draw from our collections. At a moment when the world can feel really fractured, our work is guided by the belief in the importance of shared understanding, fostered through collections, scholarship, and evidence-based storytelling. You'll find a short booklet on your seats, which tells you more about our mission and our activities. Tonight's event reflects part of this mission. It is this mission in action, I think. It is the first also of the American Revolution events and activities that we're doing across this anniversary year, and we're so proud to be partnering with The Atlantic and PBS. The Atlantic is known for its thoughtful, rigorous journalism and its ability to bring an in-depth, factually accurate and nuanced perspective to the most pressing issues of the day. We're fortunate to have with us tonight The Atlantic Editor-in-Chief, Jeffrey Goldberg. You'll all have received a copy of the magazine's special issue on the American Revolution. It is an exceptionally rich and at times unexpected exploration of this history, including two pieces that draw directly from the library's collections. There's also a flyer with a subscription discount code, 20%, which I highly recommend you all taking advantage of. We are equally delighted to be co-hosting this event with the filmmaker Ken Burns. Ken is, of course, one of the world's foremost documentary makers, and it is an honor to be showcasing a preview of his latest series, The American Revolution, here tonight. Ken is joined tonight by his co-director, Sarah Botstein, and two of the experts featured in the film, the American author Rick Atkinson and the British historian Stephen Conway. This evening brings together filmmakers, historians, and journalists who all share a commitment to rigorous research, exceptional storytelling, and a deep engagement with the complexities of the American story. It is precisely this kind of collaboration the Eccles Institute is proud to support. And it's now my huge pleasure to invite to the stage the director of the American Revolution, Ken Burns.
Thank you, Polly. We have had the most spectacular 2 days. Given how things turned out in the story we've told, we're really grateful for the generosity of sharing your remarkable library with us, and we're so happy to be with you. On behalf of Sarah Botstein, my co-director, who is here this evening, we're so happy to do that, and we owe it all to PBS, our great network, which is much under assault these days, but the American Revolution has been a very sweet victory this past fall and continues to have record viewership, and so we're very, very thrilled to lift up our organization. Our corporate sponsor has been Bank of America for 20 years, being incredibly generous and incredibly hands-off, as they must be, on the work we do. We also started many years ago an organization following Lincoln's first inaugural called the Better Angels Society, when he was appealing to the better angels of our nature before the Civil War. Didn't work, but the concept is a good one. And those are individuals who have helped contribute to our films along with the foundations that are involved with it, and I want to thank you. So we've been working on this for almost 10 years, 9 years and 11 months. We began when Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency, and we finished, the finish line was November 16th or 17th of this past year, and it's obviously continuing on through our 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Because there are no living witnesses, we have drawn on the work of about 24 scholars, 18 of whom, writers and scholars, 18 of whom are in the film. But of course, we bring the film to life, an era without photographs and newsreels, of course, with paintings and maps and drawings and etchings and documents and objects and locations, but also for doing something that we've normally not done, was recreations. Not in the sense that we would recreate a particular battle, but we would spend 7 years following reenactors from New Hampshire to Georgia in British uniforms, in French uniforms, in Native American, black soldiers, continental soldiers, militia soldiers, German Hessians, French, the gamut, and just watch what they did from afar, abstractly, and close up, intimately. And the idea was to bring it alive. The only way you can bring it alive is, in addition to a third-person narration, to populate this with first-person voices that make it come alive. And so we have over 400 individual quotes in this 6-part, 12-hour film. We have 61 actors reading those quotes, representing 150 different characters. And I wanted tonight to just acknowledge that Reese McCullough is here, one of our voices who reads, a fellow named Patrick Ferguson. But we also have someone here reading Bartholomew James, Nicholas Cresswell, one of my favorite quotes. I don't think you'll hear it tonight, though. Major John Andre, an important player in this. A couple of anonymous quotes, that is to say, it is lost to history who says them, but he delivers them perfectly. And King George III himself, and that is the extraordinary Damian Lewis, who joins us this evening, and we're so grateful that you're here. So here's the thing. We worked on this for 10 years. The original plan that Polly and I had worked out is that we were going to show 8 clips totaling about 46 minutes, and then we would yield to the discussion that she referenced with Stephen Conway and Jeffrey Goldberg, Rick Atkinson, my colleague Sarah Botstein, and myself to have a lively discussion. But we began to think, 10 years working on this, and we're showing a fraction. We learned that the BBC 4 is going to show it in June, but they're going to cut it down to 6 hours. And so what I've asked the library staff to do, and they've agreed, is they're going to lock the doors. And we're going to show all 12 hours. And if there are no bathroom breaks, you should be out at about 7:09 tomorrow morning. But I really think it'll be worth your while. No, we are going to show 8 clips, and the first is the intro, which should need no introduction. Another clip from episode 1 to speak about the commonality between these eventually warring parties. The third clip is from our episode 2. It's the end of a particularly early bloody battle that I think will shock people even today. The fourth clip is from kind of trying to see the revolution through British eyes, which we do throughout the series. But this is a short clip to give you an idea that we're not paying, the loyalists are not the bad guys in this film. We represent Irish and English and Welsh and Scottish soldiers and German soldiers and French soldiers, and we have kings and ministers and their generals, and we get to know them in the same way we understand the patriot side and the loyalists of various stripe in the United States, Native Americans, free and enslaved black people, women, half the population, hugely important to the success of this particular world-changing revolution. And then we have in our fifth clip a little part of the Battle of Long Island, which is an extraordinary battle characterized by a blunder that George Washington makes, which he makes often tactically throughout the Revolution. And we're giving you sort of the end of this very elaborate set piece on that. Same with the clip 6 is from our 4th episode, and the end in the fall of 1777 of the Battle of Saratoga, which is hugely significant. And our 7th clip is the intro of our 5th penultimate episode, which takes us through the kind of introductory material, gives a sense again of what the reaction to the war that's taking place here, and also putting George Washington and his beleaguered army in Valley Forge in early 1778. And then finally, and I hope this will be the most uncomfortable for you, or I presume it might be the most uncomfortable, we'll show a portion of a battle that takes place in Virginia in the fall of 1781. I don't really want to say anything more about it because I don't want a mass exodus from this. I'm so happy to be here. We've had such a wonderful time. This is an amazing institution. It's a resource you should all use all the time. time. I look forward to the conversation moderated by our dear friend Jeffrey and with Stephen Conway, a British historian, and Rick Atkinson, an extraordinary writer who we've grown very close to and fond of, who's 2/3 of the way through a trilogy on the American Revolution, all of them bestsellers and spectacular things that put you into the feel and the smell of this war, and my colleague Sarah Botstein. Thank you very much. I'll see you in 46 minutes, not 12 hours.
Thank you, Ken, Sarah, for making this documentary. I want to ask you about the BBC's cut of this documentary.
Gosh, we don't look.
I'm very curious how that's going to happen.
I don't know what it is. I'm not looking. It's like somebody said, we're going to amputate your baby. Tell us which limb to start with.
We're going to talk about that.
We will let our editors who have sort of ice in their veins to coordinate with the BBC. This has been my tradition since the Civil War took quite a shaving 36 years ago, but nevertheless, did quite well here.
All right. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about a lot of things tonight. First of all, thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the British Library, or as it will soon be known in Washington, the Trump British Library. I wasn't sure if it was too soon for that joke. Apparently it was.
Perfect timing.
Thank you very much. We have a great partnership at The Atlantic with Ken and Sarah and their team. You have the Revolution issue in front of you. I think you've all got that. And we have a great relationship with Polly and the Eccles Center and the British Library, and it's going to go forward with alacrity and excitement. So you'll hear more about that soon. I want to start, if I may, something that when we've done this in America, didn't start here, but we're in the British Library. It's the home of King George III's library. His own library is here. One of the many remarkable aspects of this documentary series to me, and there are many revolutions within this revolution, is that it's probably almost to a fault, the fairest representation of King George III that we've ever seen in America. For those of you who are not from America, he's not popular. And even before Lin-Manuel Miranda really did a number, literally did a number on him, he's not popular at all. But I thought maybe all of you, maybe Ken, you could start, but we have these eminent historians with us. Maybe you could start by talking about the revision of King George's reputation.
Well, part of our attempt in any projects that we have done have been to not just tell a top-down story, but a bottom-up as well. And so while we give dimension and character to those boldface names that may or may not be familiar to most people, we introduce scores of other so-called ordinary people from all walks of life to populate the film. And we use a baseball analogy all the time that we're calling balls and strikes. And part of that has to be resisting the temptation to put the white hats on the good guys and the black hats on the bad guys, and to show as we do. And if we'd seen the entire Battle of Long Island, you would see the extraordinarily bad decision that Washington makes. He repeats the same mistake at the Battle of Brandywine, has bad luck at Germantown. There's all that sort of stuff, and yet has the features that make him, in this case, the indispensable person of this story. But I will yield first to Rick to talk a little bit about George, because it is true, not just from Hamilton, but from our own inherited sort of conventional wisdom, is that he's crazy, that he's this mad tyrant. And what you find throughout our exploration is that is not the case. And Rick, if you wanted, and Stephen.
And then, by the way, Stephen will argue the loyalist cause. Yeah.
Not quite.
Well, first of all, the mental illness that drags him down in the latter part of his life and makes the last decade of his life, he dies in 1820, absolute misery, is nowhere to be seen during the American Revolution. He's completely compos mentis. He's very vigorous. There's a lot to admire about him. He is not the tyrant that Jefferson calls him in the Declaration of Independence. He's not the royal brute that Thomas Paine calls him in Common Sense, published in 1776. He's not the sinister ninny who prances across the stage every night in Hamilton singing "You'll Be Back." He's a constitutional monarch. He's a patriot king. He's a profound supporter of the arts and the sciences, witness the 65,000 books in the middle of this magnificent library. There's a lot to admire about him. However, he's extraordinarily stubborn, and he has fixated on several strategic misconceptions. For one thing, he has never been outside of southern England, and he never would in his entire life. So he doesn't really understand what has happened in America, that Americans have grown accustomed to being autonomous to some extent. He's got some of the big ideas wrong, and when you get the big ideas wrong, it's hard to get the outcome you hope for. For example, he believes that superior British firepower will coerce the Americans into falling in line and obeying Parliament. He believes that there is a large residual loyalism in the American colonies, he won't call them states, which is not true. About 20% of the 2 million white Americans remain loyal to the Crown. That is never sufficient for British purposes. And finally, as you saw mentioned in the film, he believes, majorities of both houses of Parliament believe, his government believes, and most of the body politic in Britain believe that if the American insurrection is permitted to succeed, it will encourage insurrections in Ireland, Canada, the Sugar Islands of the West Indies, where the real money is, in India, and it will be the beginning of the end of the British Empire, which is a new construct as a consequence of Britain's victory in 1763. So he's somebody who is so fixed that when the war ends militarily in 1781 and ends by the Treaty of Paris in 1783, he threatens to abdicate because he does not want to give in at the end. When John Adams came here as our first ambassador and had an interview with the king said to him, "I was the last to give it up." And it's true, he's the last to give it up.
How awkward was that meeting? Do you have a sense?
I think it was very uncomfortable for the king, who really did not like John Adams. Adams was a...
Even Adams' friends didn't like him.
Not a lot of people did like him. So Stephen will have thoughts on this for sure.
Oh, Stephen, can I just add one more complication to this? Was there another pathway for the king, in retrospect, that would have kept the Americans more quiescent? Eventually, there would have been independence like everywhere else, but was there another pathway?
Well, I think George III is a much misunderstood man. His reputation in America is largely based on the Declaration of Independence, where he is the target of everything. The Declaration is very noticeable for never mentioning Parliament, which is really the institution that Americans were rebelling against, Parliament's claims to authority over the American colonies. George III was revered, loved, admired in the colonies right up to the point where the war starts. When things really go wrong for him in terms of his reputation in America is that issuing of that proclamation against rebellion and sedition. He's then, rather than the neutral umpire in the sky to whom Americans appeal throughout the crises in the 1760s, early 1770s, Americans petition the king, asking the king to intervene and protect them from wicked ministries and a corrupt parliament. George III often advised his ministers to go carefully, not to provoke the Americans, not to push them when it wasn't necessary to do so. He acted as a restraining influence. And this idea of the monarch as a kind of neutral umpire who could somehow adjudicate between the colonies and the British government was very firmly fixed, I think, in American minds. And it takes really this very clear taking sides by the king in August 1775 with that proclamation of rebellion and sedition, calling on all his loyal subjects to help put down the rebellion that starts to disillusion Americans. And there are various other stages in the early part of the war that are important. The King's Navy, the Royal Navy, an institution associated with the monarchy in its very title, takes a leading part in effectively blockading the American coast, and an act of Parliament is passed authorizing the seizure of American trading vessels as though they are the vessels of an enemy state. And that, again, is the Americans are being pushed out of the British family. They're being rejected. And this is a very interesting comment from one American writing at this time, one John Adams, I think, if I remember correctly. The British Parliament and King have joined together to throw this country out of the British nation, to create an independent state, whether we wish it or not. So it's what happens in the early stages of the war that's crucial. And George III then becomes part of the problem in the minds of Americans. He's allied himself with Parliament. He's abandoned his neutrality. And that is really the end for George III in terms of his reputation in America.
And it doesn't help that in early 1776, an Englishman named Thomas Paine arrives, half dead, and publishes this most important pamphlet in American history called Common Sense, in which all of a sudden the shifting is already taking place, as Stephen has described, away from Parliament to the blame being the king. And it's very easy to have a singular thing. And he comes right out and just says that hereditary succession is an abomination in nature. And it gives ammunition to those people who are on the fence. Even after Lexington and Concord, even after Bunker Hill, the August thing, people are still thinking we can work this out.
What triggered him?
I think these ideas are in the air, and he is going to articulate in very common prose, using biblical analogies and sort of the language that is not being used by the Sam Adamses and not going to be used in June and July by Thomas Jefferson and his committee, but really direct stuff, and it takes off. And what it does is it is probably the single greatest thing that switches it. So the Declaration, as Stephen correctly say, is not king and Parliament. These are injuries and usurpations that are visited by the king. He's now the sole villain, and it's very helpful in a public relations campaign. So what we see is escalating rhetoric creates it. The more you say you're tyrannical, the more tyrannical you act. The more radical you're accused of being, the more radical you act, and you become like the bridge in Tacoma Narrows. It's destabilizing, and the thing just completely falls apart in a very short period of time.
But was there any was there an off-ramp for the king, or was, as Ken says, this was in the air?
Nobody had the wit at the time, although Burke hints at it, to come up with the idea of a commonwealth. That's the obvious off-ramp, right? It was an off-ramp for the empire, ultimately. But it's not in the air in 1775.
Samuel Johnson has the best quote where he's talking about, we don't know how to retreat, they don't know how to retreat. And there's that sense of we've just gone a little bit too far with the rhetoric, and all of a sudden we're beginning to act out that rhetoric, and all of a sudden there's bloodshed and revolution and dissolution.
There is actually a possibility of an alternative path. And this is once the fighting has started. A few months before the fighting starts, in an attempt to head off what's widely perceived to be the threat of a war, a bloody civil war within the British nation, transatlantic British nation, Edmund Burke proposes to Parliament a plan of conciliation with the colonies. And it's essentially turn the clock back to 1763, repeal all your attempts to tax the colonies, let them tax themselves through their assemblies. Then you'll be able to preserve your control of colonial trade. The colonies, in other words, will get what they were arguing for. right at the beginning of this process. We don't object to Parliament regulating our trade. We object to Parliament taxing us because we're English people who have all the rights of English people to be only taxed through representative assemblies in which we are represented. Now, I think what happens, that gets rejected by Parliament, but it's in the minds of Americans as they resist, even as they resist at Bunker Hill and beyond, that if they can topple Lord North's government, there is an alternative ministry that might give them terms. It's, ironically, at the end of the war, it's essentially the Rockingham Whigs, who were the opposition party that Burke was part of, who do actually negotiate the settlement with the Americans. But can I just pick up on Paine? I think Paine's role is not just in helping to demolish faith in the king. It also is even more profoundly important because Americans had based their whole case on their rights as British or English people. Right. What Paine does is try to demolish the British Constitution as a safeguard for liberty. He said, basically, you can't trust this. It doesn't offer you the protections you think. You can only go for God-given natural rights.
And that's what happens. An argument between British citizens explodes out into natural rights. And we're suddenly saying we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And then the cat is out of the bag. Slavery's over. Women are going to have equality. It's going to take a while, but these are things that are going to happen.
Right.
Quite a while.
Quite a while.
Quite a while, yeah.
You could shorten the documentary quite a bit if you just did that narrative. Ken Burns on TikTok.
We have a cartoon in our office that shows this weary guy on a couch, and the TV set is blaring. It's mid-90s. It says, "Coming soon to PBS, OJ, a 2,750-hour documentary." And the wife in the kitchen is saying, "Ken Burns has to be stopped."
I want to come eventually to the subject that people here want to talk about, which is to say the unfinished nature of the American Revolution, particularly against the backdrop of what's happening in our country right now. I will get there. But I want to talk about the film, which is fairly remarkable. And Ken and Sarah, we've talked a lot about this. One of the difficulties of making this, obviously, is that there's no photography, there's no video, there's no anything. You have paintings and diary entries. Sarah, maybe you could talk a little bit about the actual process and thought behind how you do this while holding people's attention. This has never been really done before.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started, we all gulped because certainly on the films I've made with Ken, we rely on more traditional documentary evidence, still photographs, newsreels, accounts, and we've talked about this a lot, what felt very daunting turned in just to an amazing artistic opportunity creatively for us, particularly around live cinematography, working with the reenactors, not just filming high above in the more curated reenactments that they do anyway, but working with all of the reenactors and the living history museums and the people who try to bring this history to life every day for millions of Americans, getting to know them, and they got really into our process. And so we filmed them impressionistically through glass, through smoke, far away, very close up, so that it's beautiful and impressionistic and not literal, but gives you a sense of how bloody and awful and terrible and the military nature of the war. And then when I was so excited for you to see some of the paintings up on a big screen because the war has been represented all around the world for 250 years. And when we first started, we thought, well, let's stick with what sort of was rendered then. And very quickly, that's a lot of documents and some etchings and stuff that we're familiar with. But then we just opened up to museums and institutions around the world and brought in everything that's been done in 250 years, including a collection of watercolors, and we had art commissioned. And in the audience are the extraordinary artists from graphic artists who created CGI World of Quebec and Trenton and Yorktown. So we just did things we've never done before on a scale we've never done before, and we relied on the documents and maps from the time. We made new material. We filmed a huge amount of live cinematography across the gorgeous American landscape over 6 years, in every season, in every weather, and it was really, really fun and really hard, and I think it's very beautiful, and the audience gets it. We were nervous. Would they understand, okay, this, the Copley portrait of Joseph Warren gets me every time, and then you see Gage, but then you have a painting that was made in the early 20th century and in the late 18th century, so it's all in the film.
We were supposed to have lunch one day. I always tell this story. We were supposed to have, and Sarah called and said, "Can't have lunch. It's snowing in Saratoga. We've got to get up. It's 5 hours north of New York, and I've got to go film the snow in."
Well, Americans can't. We've forgotten that while we were making the film, it literally never snowed, and half of the war is fought in the winter. So we finally, in the last year of editing, had crews in every part of the country where it might snow on hold. And when it finally snowed, it was a national holiday, so we had to call the Parks Department and say, "We're just going to go through the fence. Like, just let us shoot." And we did.
In the age of open AI, and I appreciate your commitment to
To the real thing.
the actual snow.
Yeah.
But Ken, could you talk a little bit more about the challenge of doing this and compare it to some of the other documentaries that you and Sarah have done together?
I think that each of the projects we've undertaken, particularly if we just centered on the wars, and it seems like that's all we've done, but we've done many other things. There's 4 films on the war, the Civil War, the World War II called The War, Vietnam, and now this. 4 out of 40, but they're significantly large and long pieces, and you definitely have with the Civil War, great photographic archive. You don't have anybody who's living, so there are a handful of people who are there on camera, but the rest are the first-person voices. As you find here in World War II and Vietnam, of course you have living witnesses, and so we jettisoned any scholars on camera except the accidental ringers who happen to be both veterans and scholars of the Second World War. And in Vietnam, it was just people who were involved in it, either civilians waiting for a loved one to come home or people, North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, as well as Americans understanding it. And so there's millions of problems, literally, no exaggeration, in doing a film like that, but we don't see that in a pejorative sense. They're just to be overcome. And so I think what happened, it was interesting, we were in the editing room finishing Vietnam, and I was looking at a map of the Central Highlands where we had created this map that was going through the Central Highlands in the Drang Valley, and you could see Viet Cong and North Vietnamese positions and American positions. And I just looked up to Sarah and I said, "We're doing the revolution next," because I thought we could then do the British moving west on Long Island, a map you saw.
The last maps we finished.
And we could do that. And then I realized, but we can't have maps all the time. This film I love maps, and this has more maps than all the other films you've made combined. But you can't have maps all the time. You remember the wonderful scene at the end of the Battle of Saratoga where Roger Lamb, an Irish soldier in the British Army, in Burgoyne's army, notices another soldier, Maguire, who runs down and greets his brother midstream near the Hudson River. This is a diarist who's actually writing almost like Leonardo-esque. He's drawing pictures along with his journal, so it comes alive, and Roger Lamb shows up all throughout our film because it illustrates it. But we realized we'd have to do this reenactments, and to do them in a way that wasn't like, please do the battle of this now. It was more, you would have a group of, say, soldiers in red coats firing their muskets in a line out of focus as through old glass to give it a feeling. You're not looking at faces. You're not distracted by a question of who these people are now. And then it would cut to a painting in which there's a volley of British fire coming from the left of the painting, and you're panning across to the rest of the action. And we didn't really know going in how this might work or how it might integrate. And it takes a long time to edit this. This is not an additive process. This is all subtractive. We have 40 to 50 times the 12 hours that we are boiling down, distilling into the 12 hours that we have. So you're getting to a place where there is a kind of grammar of how these things can be expressed. And sometimes it might be done spectacularly with an existing map in which we overlay just arrows, blue arrows for the Americans, red arrows for the British, and say Germantown. Another time we may leave the map alone and do nothing, just take the beauty of the archival map. Or we may take, and we had to, and Sarah, you should describe, we actually hired a cartographer so that we could represent the eastern seaboard of North America as it was then, where the rivers flowed then. If you look at the maps of Boston, it looks nothing. We showed this at the British Public Library, underwater in that time, you know, and we had to represent it.
Sarah, one of the revolutionary, aspects of the documentary to me is that you return the revolution, the American Revolution, to history in a kind of way. You've spoken a lot about this. We have the Civil War, we remember as a bloody battle. World War II, we obviously remember a certain way. The Revolution, in the American mind, very frequently there's Lexington and Concord, there's Paul Revere, there are a bunch of guys in Philadelphia writing great documents about the future of the world. A victory, yay. We're done.
And bloodless, completely bloodless.
And what you've done, and talk about this decision. You've returned the bloodiness and the actual misery of what happened in the Revolution to the American viewer, and that we haven't seen that very, very often at all. And I want the historians to talk about the nature of the war.
I was just going to say, these guys.
But start with you, and we'll talk about the nature of it.
We talked when we started. And Jeff Ward is reading and writing and thinking about how to tell the story. I kept thinking in my mind, and Ken and I kept talking about, okay, it's the American Revolution, which is this unbelievable revolution of turning the world upside down because of these great ideas. But certainly for Americans, they don't have any idea how long that war took, how many lives were lost, how much family against family, brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. What a deeply local, vicious, horrible war. Just Rick's description in the film of what it's like to fight a war and die with a bayonet. You have that in your mind for the rest of the show. And we have somehow so mythologized and sanitized the cost of blood and treasure. And we were making Vietnam, the great writer Tim O'Brien said to us when we started, go down to the Vietnam Memorial, look at the names on the wall, and just remember that every one of those names has a mother. And when you make a film about a war, you have to bring that to your viewer, or you've done a disservice to the men and boys who have died. So I think an animating voice in our head when we're doing a big story about a war is to somehow make sure our audiences understand what is at stake beyond the politics and the ideas.
And I think there's also this idea of contingency. We always assume that they knew how it was going to turn out. George Washington knew who he would be. And
I don't think most Americans know that George Washington ever lost a battle.
Yeah,
or he traveled with the...
Lost far more than he won.
Lost far
but he wasn't actually very good.
Well,
he say that here. This is a safe space.
Yeah.
No. It's
completely safe.
It's really important.
I promise not to tell.
He makes serious tactical errors throughout the war, but he's indispensable in so many other ways. Yeah. And there's something kind of exhilarating about being able to, in an age of bottom-up history and revisionism, sort of unforgiving revisionism, to be able to meet in the middle and celebrate somebody who is extraordinary in the ability to hold together. As Annette Gordon-Reed says, he's the glue that holds these 13 colonies together.
They're all flawed. Like, welcome to the human experience, right? George Washington is complicated. King George is complicated. The soldiers on the ground is complicated. The war is complicated. We have a neon sign in the editing room that says it's complicated.
The primary drafter of the Declaration of Independence was a obsessional slaveholder.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I mean, we know that. Come back to this, Rick. Maybe just come back to this point about the actual war. Talk about the utter brutality of it, and maybe why we, until this documentary at least, why we sort of forgotten that.
Well, there's a persistent American view, looking back now 250 years, as if the revolution is a faded lithograph. It's essentially bloodless, and that's just historically inaccurate. There were at least 25,000 Americans who died for the cause, possibly many more. There were 30,000 British and German casualties in the war, enormous cost of blood and treasure to Britain. The war becomes a global war. It's not just an insurrection on the edge of the civilized world, quote unquote. It becomes something that's when the French come into it, and then the Spanish, and then the Dutch, with other European powers involved, at least in providing moral support to the American cause, including Russians and the Swedes and the Danes. So it's fought on 4 continents. It's fought on the 7 seas. And it's incredibly relentlessly awful, as every civil war is, because this is a civil war on a number of levels between the mother country and the breakaway colonies, between Americans, loyalists versus rebels, and between Indian tribes. Indians have, in many cases, gotten along famously, and now they're forced to choose sides. So you have the 6 nations of the Iroquois, for example. 4 of them aligned with the British, 2 of them aligned with the rebels, and they're fighting each other. Nothing good comes out of the war for Native Americans. Nothing good comes out of the war for 500,000 black slaves. This is something that Americans have tended to kind of bypass in celebrating the larger achievements of the war, which include independence, the creation of a great republic, and other things. But the cost to get there it was profound. And certainly what Ken and Sarah and their team have done is to give us a very visceral sense of what that cost was.
Yeah, well, war is always hell, and this war was no different. And I think it tends to be sanitized in memory because it's seen as part of the American Revolution. Of course, the words American Revolution don't necessarily conjure up an idea of a war, but the war was integral to the revolution. And like all conflicts, it was very bloody, very, very protracted, and extremely divisive on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think the Civil War description is a really apt one on so many levels. Rick's described some of them within Britain itself. As we saw in the excerpts, there's real political division, sympathy with the Americans, sense they are fighting the cause of British liberty. But there's also that very fundamental ideological way in which this is a civil war, because it's a civil war between 2 different ideas of what it is to be British or English. The colonists, in many ways, represent an old-fashioned 17th century idea of what it is to be English. It's Englishness as meaning you have the right to self-government in your own local communities. And you're a loose confederation of self-governing communities connected by your common allegiance to the same monarch. That 17th century view clashes with the 18th century British view that British subjects should show loyalty not just to the monarch, but now to that essential institution that shares political authority with the monarch, Parliament. And that is really what this is about at a constitutional level. 2 very different views of what it is to be British at loggerheads, and really difficult to find a compromise between those 2 positions. But I wanted to come back to this idea of the Americans really defending the status quo, because effectively they aren't the revolutionary force that is changing the world. They're actually saying, hold on, we don't like what you're doing to us. They're defending the status quo. And even as the revolution moves to this more universalist idea of the rights of all men, as it's described then, or people, there's this paradox all the way, isn't there? Yes. That the South comes in to the war mainly to defend the institution of slavery from the threat posed to it by the British. And so there's a kind of sense right from the beginning, there's a contradiction there between the cry of liberty versus constitutional slavery, liberty versus despotism, and the fact that real slavery, not constitutional slavery, chattel slavery, is central.
Well, Samuel Johnson says,
economy.
why is it that we hear the loudest yelps about liberty from the drivers of the Negro?
Yeah.
Right. The rhetoric of slavery in the beginning, middle, and end of the war is fascinating for that reason.
Yeah. Ken and Sarah, when you started making this, you were making it when Obama was president. We thought that many of the questions around the nature of American democracy were settled. We're now in what I think of as a constitutional crisis, or at least we're in a period where the Constitution and the ideas of a checks and balances system are under unique pressure. When you're making this, are you thinking about this as a response to the current reality? How do you make a film about something that back in 1976 at the bicentennial we all thought we're all right, this is great, hot dogs, fireworks, great, this is right, we're free, this is great. How did you do that, and how do you factor in the unique pressures that our system is under now?
Well, this is the central question. I think our own experience is that we can say, first off, is that there's something extraordinary. We said this to a journalist who's here tonight, incredibly narcissistic about our relationship to our present moment. It's always the worst, it's always the best, it's always, we're going to hell in a handbasket, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, everything. And so you have to disenthrall yourself, as Lincoln might say, from the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. You know, we tend to sort of focus on what's wrong in a way. I think we're way more divided during the Revolution than we are now. We're way more divided during the Civil War, of course, than we are now. We're way more divided during the Vietnam era than we are now. So our job as filmmakers, part of that neon sign that's in the editing room that Sarah was talking about that says it's complicated is that, first of all, we have to, in our art, let the facts win. Like if you have a good scene that's working and you don't want to touch it, if you find new and destabilizing stuff, you have to do it. You also have to realize that these rhymes of history are going to be constantly changing. And if you put and erect a neon sign saying, isn't this so much like today? Maybe back in 2015, you're one thing. And so we tie ourselves to the mast like Odysseus and listen and don't let any of those moments affect us.
Well, maybe you tied yourself too tight, though, in the sense that I just want to push back a little bit here. The founders of the United States built the system that we have in order to protect the people of the United States from an authoritarian populace that they imagined King George III was. This is a unique moment.
It is a unique moment, and we have Alexander Hamilton at the Constitutional Convention saying, you know, what if someone should ride the hobby horse of popularity and reap the whirlwind? No man is above the law. That's in our film, and it was in before Trump was reelected, and we took out something that was even more incendiary because we thought no one will believe us that it was.
What was that?
It was Jefferson trapped in Paris, writing to Madison saying, what if someone should lose an election but pretend false votes and cause chaos?
We
just thought nobody on earth. And so not only are you trying not to play to the rhymes, you're also trying to say we have an obligation not to speak to the converted, but to speak to a general audience. And so, I mean, we agonized over every single second of this film. Even after we locked it, we would unlock it 100 times to sort of adjust so that there would not be any semblance of a suggestion that we had put something to put our thumb on a contemporary scale and make some judgment about the current moment. We trust, and this, Jeffrey, is I think the most important thing, we trust the evidence of the past to be the greatest teacher that we have. Good, bad, and indifferent.
Right. In trying to figure out how to dismount from the 12 hours, which we really did wrestle with for a long time, I think my hope is that the audience takes away a few things. One, that the founders felt that Congress, to your point about what goes on here, that Congress was the most important wing of the government. And one of the responsibilities of Congress is to represent the people. And one of the responsibilities of the people in a democracy is to exercise their right to vote and to be involved in their local community in small, medium, and large ways. And I hope, and Annette says, they wanted the people to be involved. We want to have active citizens and not have a citizenry that picks itself up every 4 years and gives too much power to the executive branch, which is what we have done in the last run in both parties. So I think for me, the hope is that the film inspires and makes people kind of more interested in the debates the founders themselves had about how this could and should work.
If you're in crisis, you're going to go to a pastor or a professional, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, where'd you come from? Who are your parents? What's your origin story? And so they're going to be able to divine, in some ways, your health, your current health, by understanding where you've been. And I think to go into the origin story without the attempt to sort of make a commentary on a particular political moment per se is incredibly difficult to do, because that's what documentaries are supposed to do. Right. They're supposed to say this person is bad and that. But I think what we've done is trust, as Sarah's saying, to the processes of that origin story to understand are present in a way that has
that
more
required
dimension.
a level of discipline.
And it requires that discipline.
It'll make it last past this moment if we have a.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say.
Past this moment.
Yes, exactly.
We want the film to be relevant 10 years from now.
We only have a couple of minutes left. I want to ask the historians this question, and we'll try to actually extract an answer on it. Will the American Revolution be successful?
The jury's out, I think.
Yes, it'll be successful. It's been successful in extraordinary ways over the past 250 years. We've come a long way from that ragged country of 2.5 million. We're now 340 some million. We've come a long way from a country that's predicated on human bondage to a country that has some level of equality between whites, blacks, and others. We're a country of immigrants as we started, and I think most of us embrace the strength that gives us. These are all good things. We've achieved a great deal, I think. It has always been a work in progress. Archibald MacLeish, who was the Librarian of Congress, and he was a prominent poet, said democracy is never a thing done. Democracy is always something a people must be doing. It's not a spectator sport. It's a participatory sport. And I think that the substantial majority of us in the country believe that in this difficult time, and we've had many difficult times, existential crises after crises in the history of America, we'll win through. So yes, we're going to win. I'll be there with you.
Ken, let me give you the final word on that question. I don't doubt that the American Revolution has been a success. I mean, I think this is our country is the greatest experiment in self-governance in the history of the world. The question is, coming out of it in 1783 and Constitutional Convention and so on, they devised a system that was meant to last forever. What will keep that system from lasting forever?
Well, I think we're seeing the greatest test. I think, there have been three great crises up to this moment after the Revolution: the Civil War, of course, the Depression, and the Second World War. I believe this is the fourth crisis, and it is. I share Rick's. I won't call it optimism, just sort of certainty that this will prevail. But it's not a given, and it requires that kind of active, muscular, democratic spirit. And we hope that through art, through conversation, through literature, that we have the opportunity to sort of make the case and make the argument for that. I mean, there's a wonderful line in two wonderful lines I want to refer to, because we're drawing on the voices of the past here. In the Declaration, Jefferson says, "All experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable." meaning we tend to be able to accept the authoritarian's boot. And so he's urging people to understand how difficult this leap will be from subject to citizen. And then you heard it. We follow the fortunes of a Hessian who arrives in episode 3 at Staten Island named Johann Ewald. He is openly contemptuous of the American experiment and whatever, but he's part of the surrendering army at Yorktown. You just heard, who would have thought 100 years ago that out of this multitude of rabble could arise a people who could defy kings? That energy is still present, and it's manifesting itself a couple days from now in the United States for yet the 6th or 7th No Kings rally. And the Supreme Court, of all things, just a few days ago, rallied, and with 3 conservative justices joining 3 liberal justices, basically said what Sarah and Rick have been saying, and Stephen as well, that if the founders were here, they wouldn't be surprised that somebody was seeking monarchical powers. Yuval Levin told this to us, the conservative scholar. They'd be surprised that the first article, Article 1 of the Constitution, the legislative, had yielded so much. And all of a sudden, the umpire, the Supreme Court, said, wait a second, that's not your province. This is the province of Article 1, the legislature. And there you could feel it. You know it better than me. You've got your finger on the pulse of this. There was a palpable kind of, whew, like, not that we are out of the woods, but that...
It was a remarkable moment when Justice Gorsuch said to Congress, you have a job.
You got a job to do.
And you might want to go.
Yeah.
Do the job. No, that was obviously a hopeful moment for the system.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the British Library will host us in 4 years, and we'll come back and tell you if it's working or not. Maybe that's the best thing we can do.
Yes, exactly.
Ken, Sarah, Stephen, Rick, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks
to
you.
the British Library.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, all of you. Ken, Sarah, your colleagues at Florentine Films, PBS, for this wonderful snapshot of this fabulous documentary, but also for the amazing work that you do in making these films that are so important. Jeff, thank you for so elegantly steering this ship tonight, but also for you and your colleagues and the work that you do at the Atlantic in telling the stories of our time that are so important. Rick and Stephen, thank you for being here and sharing your amazing expertise. Absolutely wonderful. Everybody here, do not forget the discount for the Atlantic, which is just such a wonderful treat. You really, really need to do that. We can all look out for the American Revolution film coming to us on the BBC in June, which is very exciting. Please also look out for our American Revolution exhibition happening in July in our Treasures Gallery. But between now and then, because that is quite a long wait, why don't you gem up on Rick and Stephen's books, which will be on sale outside, and they've very kindly agreed to sign them. So, without further ado, I'd like to thank the Atlantic for this amazing partnership, PBS, Florentine Films, Joe DePalasco, all the events team here, the amazing Eccles team, and of course, all of you for being here tonight. Thank you so much.